Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and I am delighted to welcome my guest today, who is Jayne Logan. Hello, Jane.
Hi, Anna. How are you?
Very well, and you are in a very different part of the world to me. You are in Canada and northern Canada at that, so a very natural place. And I bet
Yes.
you get lots of time to think, which is just as well because the topic that caught my interest. I think, it's one of those that you really have to mull over. It is the topic of astrogenealogy, and I saw that you were giving this for the Brighton Astrology Circle, and
Yes, back in
uh,
February. Yeah.
and I thought I must have a chat with Jane. So here you are.
Well, I'm delighted. I'm delighted. Looking forward to our conversation.
So, how did you get interested in this topic of astrogenealogy before we even start talking about what it is?
Okay. Well, I'll try to make this brief. It really was my reason for getting into astrology. And I mean, everybody's got a different story, right? Why we get involved in astrology and, what we're looking for. And for me, I ended up down the astrology path or starting down that path just after my mother passed. And family has always been extremely important to me. And I've always been interested in genealogy anyways, but I really struggled with my mother's passing. So I was kind of looking for answers, and I was kind of looking for something that would I guess at that point thinking would reassure me that our connection didn't end with her last breath. And so for me, as soon as I started getting into astrology, I quickly realized or believed that there was a way to overlay astrology with genealogy. And then, of course, later on, you realize that the other important piece to that is the stories that go along with it, because there's no one thing that can tell you everything you need to know, right? So it's kind of marrying. I guess I'm answering the question two way or both questions. It's marrying astrology, genealogy, and storytelling. Yeah.
It is often the death of a loved one that prompts us into finding ways of maintaining that connection, which is so crucial.
Yeah.
Um, it's the stuff of my bereavement counseling, working with clients when they're bereaved, is looking for a way in which they can maintain that connection. So
Yeah.
this is a rather lovely way of doing it. Okay, so we have the why. Tell us
Yeah.
how.
Tell us how. Wow. I don't know if we have a lot of time for how, but I think it depends on how you're going about it. With clients, it's a little bit different. For myself, it was starting with mapping out my family from a generational perspective, and I do similar with clients who are interested in that. Sometimes actually trip over their need to explore their genealogy. And sometimes they're just interested in the subject because I tell them what I do. But the how, you begin with mapping out the family and as far back as you can. So my work with clients is twofold. Sometimes I'm helping them construct their charts, if you will, or the charts of their family through the generations, and verifying birth dates and places and those kinds of things. And then I construct the charts. So I do their natal charts. And in most cases, you only have birth times for, either the person in front of you or perhaps their parents. So, going back further, you're dealing with, date, place, and all of the information that you can gain around that. But it still tells you a lot, because what you're looking for is connections and patterns, right? So connections astrologically between people, relationships, whether that's generational or cross-generational, or even, commonalities in terms of dates, tell you a whole lot. So, but again, a lot of it is also, I can't stress enough the importance of the conversation and the ongoing involvement of the client, because you really tease out a lot. And most of the projects I do are quite lengthy. Like some of them take a couple of months. Some people it might be a couple of weeks, but there's an awful lot involved. It's not just as easy as, can you find my mom and my dad in my birth chart? It's a lot more involved than that. Yeah. And then I look at, I guess to answer the question a little bit more fully, from and tell me if I'm talking too much. But from there, everything, the basics. So, where are there commonalities in terms of sun and moon signs? Where are there commonalities or patterns in terms of elements or modalities? Are there common influential planets? Are there common aspect patterns? Are there T squares that are really driving the family forward in a certain way with a common influential pattern or influential planet rather within that pattern? And it's amazing how much you trip over that. And I think, even for myself, found out a lot more than I would have ever expected. So that's kind of like I guess, the Reader's Digest version of the how. Does that kind of cover your question?
It does, and I think this is a very nuanced and complex
Yeah,
project
yeah,
because essentially what you're doing is you're looking at as many family charts as possible.
yeah,
And I guess you're drawing out themes that crop up
yeah,
in each of the charts. And I'm just thinking about how some people would say, well, there's only 12 signs. So, but it's not that, is it? It's
no,
it's the common, it's the placing of them that you find
yes,
in common. So, a number of Taurus or a number of Capricorn or whatever that tells you. And
yes,
then the ones I find really fascinating are the actual aspects.
yes,
So, for instance, my mom has a moon Pluto square, so does my niece.
hmm,
Mom has a moon Chiron square, so do I.
right,
Um, my father has a Mars Pluto square, so does my brother. So, beyond the signs, it's seeing the aspects crop
yes,
up,
yeah.
which I find very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, when you're dealing with a client that they're not always familiar with astrology, so an easy place to start is to talk about the sun sign, right? And, then you can kind of delve into the moon sign and, again, depending on the client, it's either, some astrological reference or not, right? But the connection, I think people are looking for connection. That's one of the starting points. And some of the ways that you focus in on the sun sign is through common birth dates or common passing dates. So, for example, my grandfather, believe it died on the exact same day, in terms of not the same year, but the same date. So, say December 16th, as his mother did. And he was orphaned at the age of 1.5. So, that also set was a clue in terms of what was going on in my family, because what I was dealing with was an extreme sense of loss that really was much heavier than just the loss of one's mother. I mean, it was almost like, in fact, if you've seen the one that I did for Brighton, it actually, I think I resolved it. We went back to 1825 is where it all began. So, the constant of losing a parent was just, it's almost like the weight of that, because I do believe the energy passes down through the generations. The weight of that seemed to rest with me. Now, I'm a Capricorn moon, so I have Capricorn moon in the 8th house, which is square my sun, square my Venus, square the nodes, and I have Pluto at the base of my chart. So, in terms of what I was dealing with, I mean, Plutonian energy is not foreign to me. It's kind of, that's what my soul has lived, if you will, and what the family has lived for generations. But the idea of separation and loss, I mean, my biggest fear my whole life was losing one or both of my parents. So when that happened, that was the trigger that sort of released everything. And when you're looking at astrogenealogy, and I don't know if mine is an extreme case or not, but I wasn't able to fully resolve it for about 16 years. So pulling it all together, doing all of the research and going back to 1825, and I mean, people might think I'm crazy, but when I actually connected all those dots in that moment, I felt a huge relief. It was a huge release of energy, it was almost like a cleansing. in a really strange way.
It's so vital when I'm teaching astrology to my students and they get to that point where they're comfortable in reading a chart and I start getting them to do live readings.
Hmm.
I get to that point where I say to them, okay, well, now you're going to tell the story. Instead of it being this means this and this means that and this, it's tell the story
Yeah,
and begin with the background
yeah,
because this is the context in which everything that is exists.
yeah.
So I think just looking at that as the foundation for what is, and then looking at the charts of
Hmm.
previous generations, what we're doing is we're setting, as I say, it's setting everything in a context. And I
Hmm.
think the power of that to heal can't be understated because when we see why we are struggling with what we're struggling with,
Hmm.
and particularly where there's tensions within families, if we can understand the source of those tensions,
Hmm.
then it deepens our compassion and our ability to let go of the past. And that's absolutely vital for healing.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree. It's interesting. One of the things that I've struggled with astrology over the years, or some people who are interested in astrology, is they're looking for like the one answer. What's the one thing? And there isn't one. There isn't just one thing. So, for example, I would say I have a Capricorn moon. My mother had a Capricorn sun, the exact same degree as my moon, by the way. Her mother had a Capricorn sun, so there was a history of Capricorn. So on the surface, people go, "Well, that's great, that's interesting," but my next question is, but what does that mean, right? So unless you're looking for what does that mean, it becomes almost a novelty, right? And that's obviously not what I'm interested in. I mean, I'm looking for deeper. And it is amazing how deep you can go with a client in this, and how helpful. I mean, when I look at what it did for me, it's kind of wanting to help other people as well who are experiencing some kind of challenge. And it's not always grief. I had one client a number of years ago who was a little bit older, and his concern was, why had he always had a difficult relationship with his parents, his mother in particular? He'd felt unloved his whole life. And we had gone back about 4 generations. So we looked at the astrology, we looked at the generational charts, we looked at the stories. And when it came right down to it, it was like, because we were doing Zoom, right? And you could actually see the relief because he said, so it wasn't that I was not lovable. And what a powerful moment. And this is one of those stories that's it's I mean, it's a sad story too, because his urgency in trying to figure this out was he had been diagnosed with a terminal disease, and he passed about a month after that. But we had some conversations between the it wasn't that I wasn't loved, and just I think about a day before he passed, and he said, I have never felt as loved as I have in this last month. And I feel like I can pass over like with total relief and not, like, that he had really resolved something. And I felt really privileged in a way to be able to help him with that, but so glad that I did. And I thought, if that is all I ever accomplish with this, that's enough. But it was so helpful for him.
It's crucial, all of this. I mean, I don't know if you've done any work with family constellations,
No,
uh,
I haven't. Yeah.
but again,
I'm familiar with it, but yeah.
it's that same principle of being able to untangle
Yeah.
the energy that we carry from our ancestors, and it comes back to that context. In my work as a hypnotherapist, it's not uncommon for me to, as part of the healing visualization, to be tracking things with my client
Yeah.
through generations so that they don't feel that burden that is not theirs, and
Yes.
to help them to release themselves from that burden and put it where it belongs,
Yes.
is in the past. That is
Yes.
in the past.
Yeah. And sometimes it's as simple as validation. It's not that I've been, for a particular individual, it's like, okay, I've been feeling this way all my life, and I was right to feel that way. It's sad that I did, but I was right to feel that way. So that, having that kind of an understanding, there's also a healing involved in that. And I think there's also some stories within families going back that are pretty tragic. And in some ways, that I like to think that also helps the ancestors, understanding their situation and what they may have gone through. And in a way, it does give them a voice when you're going through this type of thing.
Yes. And that's, it's something that is very difficult to explain, but you
Yeah,
you know it, don't you?
yeah,
You feel the relief going back. You know,
yes,
the energy just becomes lighter, and I can't describe it any other way, that
yeah,
the energy just becomes lighter.
yeah.
Um, and it's more palpable than it being the person has changed. It seems like it's the whole weather has changed.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. I've thought to myself, I wish I had, arrived at this place of understanding while my parents were still alive. But then I also wouldn't have studied astrology if my mother was still alive. So, it's one of those things. But it's also, for me, um, validation of how significant her time on Earth was. Because if her time on, if she hadn't been here, and passed, I wouldn't have gone through what I have, and I wouldn't have been able to help people along the way, because that's what it really is about. It's about helping other people get through whatever they're dealing with in their lives, or helping them move forward. Because in most cases, it doesn't end with the conversation about astrogenealogy. It's okay, now I understand all of this. What can I do next? Right, or what do I? And that's where Dane Rudger, a map of potentiality, is the chart, right? So using that to kind of guide you forward as well.
So let's just imagine that you're dealing with somebody
Mm-hmm.
who also has children or grandchildren. We've talked about unraveling backwards.
Yeah.
What impact does this have going forwards in terms of generations?
Yeah, I've done some work in that respect. So taking a look at what the patterns are with either children or grandchildren. And it's interesting because you can also see an evolution of the pattern. Either it's getting more extreme or it is resolving itself. So, for example, in dealing with one family, there were father-son challenges, significant enough that it prompted immigration for one, for one son to leave. Never really resolving the issues with his father. He has a son. They have some difficult challenges, not quite as drastic as the father grandfather. And then that son has a son, and his father would be like, I don't want him to go through what I went through, and modified his approach to fatherhood. So it's been a progression. It's like a lessening of whatever the pattern may have been. So that whole dynamic in terms of father-son relationships was, I would say, not 100% resolved, because nothing ever really is, but a far cry of where it was four generations ago.
Do you see, because very often as parents want to avoid
Mm-hmm.
what happened between them and their parents, there
Yeah.
there are often elements of overcompensation that create new issues. Can you see
Yes.
that?
Yes, for sure. For the fellow that I mentioned earlier about not being good enough, his overcompensation was an extreme need to excel in absolutely everything. I mean, he was full on in every aspect of his life. and was concerned when he finally realized that, because we had a large conversation about it. When he finally realized that, is okay, how do I make sure my sons understand sort of my approach to life and why I went down that path, and then hopefully help them in a way that if that's not repeated. Now, sadly, he didn't have a lot of time after that realization, but ideally, and I would say within his children's chart, there was only one that had the pattern, because not everybody does, right? I mean, it's not in every person. Only one had the pattern, but the trajectory of his life, based on my understanding and my conversation with the client, was not going down the same path. So it didn't seem to be concerning, but certainly that individual understood what was going on with his father. So that was a positive.
So you mentioned that the sun and moon play an important part in this, and presumably that's where you start.
Yeah.
Where do you go next?
Elements. Elements. It's as simple as that. Sometimes the simple answer is the easy answer. And I also find when you're talking elements, clients understand that. Even if they have no understanding of astrology, they do understand that, and you can have an interesting dialogue. So, for example, a family that has no water in their charts, taking a look across the generations, there's 4 generations of one particular example, and almost no water in anybody's chart. Lots of air, some earth, some fire, no water. So how these people connected, it was intellectually, it was conversation, it was learning, it was all those kinds of things. And they were connected, but they weren't visibly emotive. There was not that emotional thing. They weren't a huggy family. They weren't, what we call, warm and fuzzy kind of thing. And, for one person in that family would be, well, my mother never hugged me. My mother never kissed me. There wasn't a lot of that going on. So, what did that mean? Well, it didn't mean she didn't love you. It's just how that is demonstrated is completely different. So elements go a long way. There's another example of a family who the daughter, her mother was Taurus and the daughter was Pisces. And so she needed more of the connection, more of the emotional connection. Her mother was very much, I put a roof over your head, you have clean clothes, and I feed you. Therefore, I love you. And the daughter's like, what? So having a conversation with her, and I'm simplifying here a little bit, but I said, it wasn't that your mother didn't love you. It was the way that she could demonstrate that was completely different than what you feel you need, and perhaps what you do need in terms of the emotional nature of your chart or your being, right? So even that understanding, and I actually heard from her a couple of weeks later saying, I've thought a lot about that. What a difference that has made. Because, just even in the relationship. So if the relationships are still, the people are still alive, it can make a great deal of difference in terms of that relationship going forward. If they're not, it resolves a lot within yourself to understand how that person was, and perhaps give them a little bit of forgiveness and a little bit of understanding in retrospect.
There are certain patterns that also crop up in families, such as marriages that are either very good or very bad, or abuse or abandonment, going right through. How do you see that?
Well, I can show up any number of ways. And I have had clients where they didn't at the start talk about certain abuses in their family. But going back, you could see how that could happen and where that actually might have originated. And often it's one side of the family. It's either the maternal side or the paternal side. Sometimes it's both. But the place to start, I'm thinking of one client in particular, the place to really start is to help them understand why that occurred, a little bit more about the people that they were dealing with. So whether it's mother, daughter, mother, or sister, brother, that kind of thing. And then trying to help them towards help them move towards healing to at least a degree. And I've been working with one client for the last 3 years on that, and the difference between where she was 3 years ago to where she is today is incredible. There's still some times where she'll slip back because you know what you've been doing your whole life, right? But the way that she's been able to experience her life for the last, I would say for sure, the last year and a half has been substantially improved over what was before. But a lot of it was really understanding. Yeah.
It's such a fascinating thing. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking, okay, we're talking about circumstances that are created by people,
Hmm.
but I do come across patterns of death as well, um,
Yeah.
with clients. Tell us how you see that.
Patterns of death.
So, losing a parent, and then the next generation loses a parent, and the next generation, and it
Yes.
seems it's like a weird jinx, you know.
It's yes, it's similar ages, for
Yes,
example, similar ages. I'll share a personal example with you that I mean, the astrology around this is fascinating actually. But the my great grandmother was let's see, she was I can't remember how old she was, but she I'm trying to reference the date. Anyways, the late 1800s. So in the January, she lost her brother. Her brother was 23 years old. He was killed on the night of his 23rd birthday. He was pulled under a train accidentally and died that way. At the time, she happened to be 6 months pregnant and not married. Got married the month later, gave birth to a son 2 months later, and at the age of 14, that son was killed under the wheels of a milk float in London. And he happened to be the oldest of 12 children. So she had 11 other children to be concerned about. But still, how heartbreaking is that? Her father in law was killed by a hansom cab in London. So all under the wheels of the vehicle. Fascinating.
yes,
Sad, but fascinating. Right? So you start to look at the astrology there. And a lot to do with, in that those particular examples, Mars and Uranus, and Chiron, believe it or not, was prominent in their charts. So, and prominent in terms of transits at those points in time. But you know, I think about what a difficult life that woman had, but she lived to be 96. So you know, there's a resilience to a lot of these people as well. Um, but yeah, it's patterns of death. As I mentioned, my grandfather, he was or well, we were told he was orphaned at the age of 1.5, and certainly his mother did pass. He had two older siblings, but he was abandoned by his father, left with his maternal grandparents, and his father went off to America to try to make his fortune. Ended up coming back, but he never saw his son again. So here we are. My grandfather, for example, feels the loss of his mother. And regardless of the fact he's only a year and a half, you had a mother one day and you don't, the next, that's got to have an impact. And then being abandoned by his father. Talk about a double whammy, right? So there's a lot in that respect. So I took that and I went back, as I mentioned earlier, to 1825. And there was a lot of that went on. So either children losing their parents at a really early age, or losing them around similar circumstances, and mothers raising their children on their own was another thing. My mother's family seemed to her nuclear family seemed to have skipped that particular challenge. So did I actually, but again, you know, the weight of that down the generations. So, but I've been talking about two different sides of the family as well for different reasons. But yeah, patterns of death. Yeah. Yeah, suicide as well. Dealing with families who have had a lot of examples of suicide. One family in particular, it's the grandfather had committed suicide, the father, and the brother, and taking a look at that. But again, how different people's lives are. Those events, and they trigger all kinds of things, as you would know just in your work.
indeed. And just thinking about all of this, some people would argue, oh yes, but in in historical contexts, these are things that happened a lot. But you see it happening in our time too, uh,
Mhm.
in more recent history,
Yeah.
where it's not so common, but you see these patterns um, of accidents and suicides and people being the way that children are handled when there's the death of a parent.
Yeah.
It's not always in the way that we might expect. And, you know, the other parent may well abandon the child with the grandparents because they can't deal with it or whatever reason. So it's very easy to brush things off,
Yeah.
but there's much more to this than just, oh, that's just the way things were. It's much
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes, there certainly are some things that are indicative of the times. Like when you think about, London and the Blitz, World War II. My dad grew up in London then. He was not one of the children who was evacuated, so he experienced that. But his parents weren't present, so he was raised by his grandmother. His parents came back after the war, but still, you've got that disconnect, right? So, that was a product of the time. Yes, it's a product of people and their decisions, but I think even in that example, you can say, well, my parents still did the best they could at the time, and they didn't have an option. And again, it wasn't about me.
No, that's right. And it's very important because I have given several talks on this subject, but we must remember that we do not exist in a vacuum
Yeah,
and that everything happens in the context of society, and that those social trends affect the family, and 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 there it creates a family culture which then um, impacts on us individually. So it's very important that we have that understanding when we're looking at charts and wanting to help clients resolve very deep-seated issues. So
yeah.
you've given us another marvelous tool to do that. And Jane, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I enjoyed speaking with you.
And if people want to find you, how do they do that?
JaneLogan.com.
And I'll be putting a link to this in the description box. Thank you very much, Jane.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for watching. A reminder that in the description box, you will also find links to my own website and also to my Substack. If you are new to astrology and want to learn more, I am starting a new group for beginners in October. And if you just want to get your head around secondary progressions and prediction, there is also a course starting in October. Next time, we're going to be looking at synastry. Until then, goodbye.